Previously on the business.
Go to the phones now and welcome our next guest onto the show. He is the managing director and founder of PayFast, which is a payment gateway system. Jonathan, welcome to the business here on Balls.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell us quickly about PayFast. Give us a bit of background into the business and explain to everybody what you guys do.
So PayFast is an online payments processing service. It was started about 6.5 years ago by myself and a gentleman by the name of Andy Higgins, who was the MD of... There was very little in the way of accessible payment options on the internet. It was pretty much, merchant accounts with credit card merchant accounts, and that was it. And we found that EFTs were being very popular, so we developed a product around that. We then later, after discussions with the bank, brought on credit cards, and then now we've gone to the point now where we aggregate across a variety of different payment methods, and we offer a turnkey online payment processing solution for e-commerce businesses. So it's pretty simple now, where you come to our website, you sign up with a digital form, you submit some documentation to us, and you can be up and running selling online in less than a day.
Jonathan, that's the selling side of it.
Sure.
How does a consumer who lands on one of the sites, one of your clients' sites, how do they know whether the system in place on the back end is in fact intact?
So what our clients fundamentally are sellers, right? So we charge for receiving payments. So our true client is the seller, the online store. But obviously we deal with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of buyers in the process of bringing security and ease of use to the payment flow. So in terms of what the buyers will see, it is a co-branded approach. It's very similar to if you've used some international systems that work similar to ours. So if a buyer's on the site, they'll go and they'll put some things in their cart. When it comes down to payment, they'll say, right, I want to pay, and one of the options there will be pay by PayFast. They'll click on that. It'll redirect through to our secure payment engine, where they'll be given a variety of different ways to pay, either credit card, EFT, UCash, and there are one or two other ones in the background. We then manage the payment process, so we take away a lot of that complexity from the sellers, so they don't have to worry about SSL certificates, they don't have to worry about the security. We handle all of that on our side, and the buyer can choose how they wish to pay, make payment, and thereafter they get redirected back to the merchant's website, and their order is paid for, and fulfillment can continue.
Jonathan, I'm a little bit confused, and maybe you can clarify this for me. I mean,
Sure.
if I choose to buy a watch, for example, let's just use that as a random example, and PayFast is involved in the process.
Sure.
I'm not buying the service of PayFast. I'm buying the watch, and the process that happens thereafter for me is. It's inconsequential as long as I know it's safe. From a consumer's point of view, I want to know that my card numbers, my digits aren't getting out there, and that the money is getting to the right person. So it's not a choice that I'm making.
Sure.
How does the consumer look at that and go, okay, I'm safe versus I'm not safe?
I guess it's the credibility of the brand that you're representing, isn't it, Jonathan?
Exactly. So you've got to kind of look at it as a consumer. One thing I would like to get across in this regard as well is that people shouldn't be too concerned in terms of, as a consumer, you shouldn't be actually too concerned about transacting online. Obviously, you've always got to be careful. You need to. It's the same as if you were shopping in the physical world and you went to a store and it looked scruffy and it didn't look really good. You probably wouldn't shop there. And the same is true with shopping online. Have a look at the website. Make sure they've got contact details. That it looks reasonably legitimate, right? But as a consumer, if you do something like that and you find that the receiver is actually fraudulent, you don't get your items, you are actually protected by the banks. At the end of the day, it's the merchant is the one at risk from fraudulent buyers. So the consumer is actually, it's really a small problem. It gets blown up by, out of proportion by the internet and by, the very nature of the internet. But consumers, to a large degree, are protected from fraud on the internet. And if you have any kind of issue, generally you contact your bank and they'll be able to solve it for you and return the money. So you shouldn't be too concerned as a consumer in that regard. But to speak to your initial question, Having a brand so we deal with hundreds of thousands of buyers, and there are often a lot of guys starting, especially in the last few years, starting to sell online, lots of small to medium enterprises, and they don't have the kind of trust that maybe a brand like PayFast has built up. So it's actually very beneficial for them to use a company such as us, where our brand is probably better known than their brand. So when buyers come to a new website, they're like, we're not so sure about this, but they see a brand like PayFast, which they recognize, they have a lot more comfort that the transaction is legitimate, and if there is a problem, they can also give us a call. So it does give them a lot of comfort in that regard.
Jonathan, I've got a personal question to ask
Sure.
you. I transacted a couple of months back on an international website. I used my credit card.
Mm-hmm.
And I made a booking that was specifically for a car rental at a particular location. When that site sent me the confirmation, they had somewhere on the back end, it was clearly a back end thing, the name of the location where I was going to pick up the car had defaulted to a completely different destination. So I immediately picked up the phone to my bank to say, look, I've just done this transaction. It's a few $1,000. It's going to be in foreign currency, and there is a problem with the booking. Where do I start? I want to retract it and redo it, give myself the time to try and find a telephone number for them to contact them. The bank, in fact, said to me, we can't help you. You have to go back to the merchant. They have to retract. It was some kind of a code or something. We can only help you when you give us that code. Now, that's a lot of legwork for the consumer. Surely an entity such as yours can start playing in that space. So I guess I'm picking a bone, with you on the sense where you said the consumer's protected by their bank. It seems like there's a lot of finger pointing going on about whose responsibility it is.
Look, ultimately, with the Visa and MasterCard networks, there's always an obligation to kind of protect both parties in the transaction, to protect both the consumer and the merchant themselves, right? I mean, everyone wants to see successful transactions take place. They don't want to see fraud. They don't want to see unhappy customers. So that there are resolution processes, but generally speaking, the consumer is more protected because as with all these things with businesses, you've got to kind of play in a little bit of different space. You've got to accept that you're going to have certain losses as a cost of doing business, and one of those losses is credit card fraud, where ultimately the merchant is held responsible. Now, I can't speak to your exact situation, but it does depend if you potentially went through a 3D Secure process where you were knowingly authorizing it. There are so many different variables about this. I would say ultimately that if you tried to contact the car rental company and you couldn't resolve it and there was real issues, you would ultimately be protected by the bank. But those are specifics about your situation that might have been the reason why they gave you that feedback. But generally speaking, you as a consumer are protected. But there is always a duty of care in you to actually try and resolve the issue with.
I did. I ended up having to call some office in London somewhere.
Yeah. So there's always
there's a lot of legwork.
One thing I will say for us, because of the fact that we are a third-party payment provider, we do end up being involved in those kind of situations, right? Now, we don't want to get involved being an escrow service because those just don't work. It just costs
Could
too
you
much
just
for the
explain
consumer.
escrow, Jonathan, for our listeners?
Okay, so what escrow is where there is that kind of distrust between the two parties. If you're doing like a first transaction and you say, right, well, I'm not sure about this person, so then both of you, between, let's say, the buyer and the seller, you designate a trusted third party, and the buyer then says, right, I want to buy this item from the seller, but I don't want to give you the money immediately until I have the item, okay? So the buyer then says, I want to pay this third party over here. Let's assume that's PayFast. We don't do it, but let's assume it's us. So I'm going to pay PayFast the R1,000, and then what happens is they pay PayFast the R1,000. PayFast then says to the seller, look, we have the money from the buyer. You can ship the goods. The seller then ships the goods to the buyer. Then once the buyer gets the goods, the buyer says, great, look, I've received the goods and they're all fine. And then the trusted third party pays money over to the seller. So what that means is that basically no one party has both the goods and the money until the transaction has been successfully concluded. That's what escrow is. But escrow, it really only works when you're dealing with sort of massive amounts. There are services that historically have tried to do this. It was prevalent in the auction realm. I think early days of eBay or the very early days of online marketplaces that did this because of that distrust. Now what is preferred is that when you start transacting online in marketplaces as well as with websites, that trust is built up over time. And initially, to build that trust as a seller, you need to really up your game and be good and maybe sell products at a discount so that people will buy from you. And then over time, you get these ratings to say, yes, I've done a transaction, this guy was good, we're happy with the service. So if you go to Bid'll or eBay or any of these marketplaces, you'll see that sellers have ratings. And generally, once you've built up a good reputation, people will trust you. And that's really the preferred approach, because escrow, it just costs too much. They would charge you the fee, which would be the 5% or whatever, and then they'd charge you an additional fee for the escrow service, which would be almost double that fee again. So that said, that's what escrow is, but it really doesn't work. But what I was getting to originally is that we do get involved in these kind of not disputes per se, but these things where someone's paid for something to one of our clients and they haven't received it. They try and phone them, they don't get any joy, then they phone us. And we do get involved, and we do generally resolve these amicably by, we have a lot of information at our disposal. We do sit in the middle of a transaction, so we have a certain time span in which we can actually act appropriately. We make a determination to say, well, look, there's something fishy here. We get involved with the seller, we get involved with the buyer, and we resolve it how best suits the situation. So there is a lot of good things to be had for using a service such as ours on the both buyer and the seller side for situations such as that.
Jonathan, you're a homegrown business, homegrown payment gateway.
Indeed. Yeah.
Final question: How do our homegrown payment gateways compare with the international players?
Well, in what sense? Are you looking in terms of comparison?
Well, South Africa has a great reputation. I mean, it's got a very advanced banking industry, a very advanced financial services sector, and presumably that's had a positive spin-off effect for the payment gateways that are being put together by players such as yourselves. I mean, is there any reason for a consumer to think, it's South African, they don't deal with as much traffic as the international guys, not going to be as good?
No, definitely not. I mean, look, the solutions that have come out of South Africa are fantastic. I mean, some of the most successful solutions in the world have come out of South Africa. I mean, a good case in point would be something like Amazon EC2, which is the brainchild and a lot of the hard work of some guys out of Cape Town. So there's a hell of a lot of stuff that has been very successful on a global stage that was developed or either in South Africa or by South Africans. So I wouldn't hold any sway in that regard. Yes, our e-commerce industry is still really small. I mean, comparatively, it is a tiny industry, but there are a hell of a lot of good solutions and a hell of a lot of good businesses coming out of South Africa in terms of payments specifically, partly because of the fact that we have such a highly regulated banking system and such a highly regulated industry. It's often much easier and cheaper to use the local solutions than it is to use international solutions, which have to jump through a few more hoops in order to actually operate in South Africa, and that always adds to the cost. So there are other international gateways which you could use, but your costs in terms of exchange control reporting, fees to repatriate funds, all the rest of it, just make the fees probably double what we would charge someone. And to a large degree as well, most of these international players wouldn't be able to transact in local currency. They wouldn't be able to transact in ZAR. So if you're servicing a local market, it makes no sense to use an international provider. If you're servicing predominantly an international market, then yes, there is a choice there to be made.
And final point from me, I noticed that there's this little competition going on between Joburg and Cape Town when it comes to IT and security and online shopping and stuff. And it seems to me over the past few days we've been phoning 021 numbers far too many times for my liking. You guys in Cape Town are really kind of leading the whole charge. So it's a nice one there, Jonathan.
I have a pretty good perspective on this because actually, truth be told, I'm a Gauteng.
We're happy to hear it, Jonathan. We are thrilled to hear that.
Victoria and worked and lived between both. I've been in Cape Town for the last sort of 5.5 years, still from the early days of PayFast. But the move was incredibly fortuitous for me, and I always, whenever this comes up in conversation, I make the analogy, which is very similar to what the U.S. is between New York and San Francisco, where you still find that New York is the business hub, but San Francisco is where all the new things are happening, all the creative things are happening. And the same is very true when it comes to South Africa, where you'll find that predominance of business and population is still sitting in Gauteng and Johannesburg, but a lot of stuff is coming out of Cape Town. So in terms of e-commerce and online, most of that is really sort of coming out of Cape Town. And that's historically because of the fact that you've got a lot of the media agencies down here. Obviously, the big gorilla, you've got NicePass down here as well. And that has led to, and there's also a lot of internationals, and that has led to a lot of the new businesses coming out of Cape Town, be it sites like Yappy Chef, Kalahari, Take-A-Lot, PayFast. There's a hell of a lot of these sites that are Zando as well, Rocket Internet, even Google, the Google and Bono project. All those sort of things are happening in Cape Town. There's a hell of a lot of focus on startup and on community, which I personally didn't ever find in Pretoria and Johannesburg.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time today. Jonathan Smit, the MD and founder or co-founder of PayFast, that payment gateway. Thank you, and I hope that your festive season and your holiday season is productive and very successful.
Thank you very much.
Take care. All the best. There you go. Interesting conversation, really. Some question marks over the conversation, but generally, he seems to be quite bullish about the fact that it's safe to do stuff online.
I had a great insight there, just on one of the last things that he said, because I'm often confused by how do I know whether the payment gateway is a trusted one or not? And we see the international names and the local names, and we don't really know whether they're local or international. But I think what I'm going to do going forward is if I see the name of the payment gateway alongside the brand, is just go and check out whether they are local or not. I think he made such a valuable point there about it'll cost you less on the transaction fees to use a local one.
Nice interview. Nice point there, Astrid.
The Business on balls.co.za. Brought to you by FNB Business Banking.